Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hideaway. Hope you're all okay. I found this free coffee table on Facebook Marketplace and it looked like a decent project for a furniture flip. So I went to pick it up. It was just left on the woman's driveway. I brought it back to the workshop to see what we could do with it. So let's get into it. So before I did anything, I had a closer inspection of the table's condition and it wasn't too bad. A few scratches here and there, and other places where the finish had chipped away. There are a couple of marks which should look like paint marks, but nothing too daunting. You can see here where it's just chipped away. There was this sticker on the bottom of the table, not quite sure what that was about. But in general, it was in pretty decent condition, so I wasn't overly concerned about it from a repair perspective. And at first glance, removing the old finish was going to be relatively straightforward. So with this one, I decided to get a bit creative and turn it into a river table. Well, kind of. So before I got into cleaning and removing the old finish, I thought I'd draw out a design just on some paper that was taped to the top of the table. My plan is, rather than doing a river table in the traditional sense, I would route out the design to about 7 or 8 mil depth, rather than creating a form or a mold for the river table as you normally would. The table was an odd shape and I thought that would have taken a little bit longer. So I cheated. Ha. After I got an idea of what the design was going to look like, I needed to remove the legs and the metal feet off the bottom of the table. Then it was ready for cleaning and removing the finish. Just using my old favourite here, elbow grease, just to get rid of the grime and the paint marks. They came off relatively easily with a bit of a scrub with the elbow grease, and then did the same with the legs, and then we were on to removing the finish. So initially I tried to scrape off the old finish, but it was having none of it. So I didn't want to delay, so I just got the old DeWalt orbital sander out and started to sand off the old finish instead. I went down to about 80 grit. It was pretty stubborn, the old finish. So 120 just wasn't doing it. So I went down to 80 and it was then started to come off a treat. I then moved on to the legs and I continued with the orbital sander here. For the most part, the legs were pretty flat, so the orbital sander was fine to use. But then when it came to the rounded edges of the legs and the tabletop, I just got a bit of 80 grit sandpaper and did it by hand. I then got the multi-tool out with a detail sander attachment just to get right into the corners, and it was just a job. And then when all the sanding was done, just a bit of a wipe down with some white spirit to remove all the dust. So then it was time to transfer the image I made earlier onto the tabletop. So I'm using carbon paper here. Then I'm just sticking the design over the top of it and then tracing the image so the design is transferred onto the tabletop. Took a few minutes to get it transferred, but got there in the end, and now we're ready for routing. I started routing with a V-groove bit, following the line of the river's edge, as it were. You'll probably notice a bit of smoke coming from the router. This router bit was a bit duller than I thought, and because of that it was struggling a bit and burning as I went. So I ended up changing a bit to something sharper, and it went through it like a knife through butter. Lesson learned there, Matthew. Tut tut. But it was about here that I noticed that this table wasn't solid wood. It was a type of chipboard that had been veneered. So that was something I needed to think about later in the project when it came to the resin pour. Once I was done with the routing, I just got a little bit of sandpaper and just tidied up the edges where it looked a little bit rough. So even though this is chipboard, I'm going to crack on with my original plan. What I am going to do though is I'm going to make a small mix of clear resin and just paint that on to the riverbed and the river sides. That will act as a like a sealant for the resin that's going to sit on top, which will be the main pour. So I'll make that up now, paint it on, wait for that to cure, and we should be good to go for the main pour. So for all the resin I'm using in this project, I'm using craft resin and the accompanying hardener. It served me well in all the resin projects that I've done. It's pretty clear once it's had a good stir for about 5 minutes or so. So for sealing in this riverbed, I knew it was going to be just what I needed. Okay, so the resin is cured and I'm pretty happy that that is going to act as a good seal for the main pour. So pleased about that. On this edge here, it's got a bit of a beveled edge. I think it's either been routed that way, shaped that way. I don't know how they've done that, but I need to account for that when I do the main pour. So first of all, I'm just going to put some painter's tape just around the mouth of the river, and then I'm going to use. I'm probably just going to trim this down a little bit. I don't need it to be this deep, but I'm going to use this flexible plastic that's got an adhesive on it, and it's just going to help mold to that shape of this round this edge here, just to stop the resin from flowing out. I just need a barrier, so I'm going to use that around both ends. I'm also going to put some painter's tape just round the edge of the river, like on the river bank, if you like. And I'm also going to put some clear lacquer, just, I don't know, maybe up to 5 mil in from there. My main reason being is that I need to mask around the river because this is veneered. This is and well veneered chipboard. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to go through the veneer. That would be disastrous. So I need to mask it some way. So I'm going to use painter's tape and clear lacquer to give me some kind of barrier. So once I've done that, we're ready for the main pour. So we'll do that now. Okay, so everything's taped up. I put some lacquer on. So we're ready for the pour. You might notice I've put the table on some furniture trolleys. Now, my rationale for that is that if we do get any kind of leakage down here, it will just drip kind of straight onto the floor rather than kind of going underneath. So I've got some silicone mats, which I'm going to pop underneath to catch any resin that does drip. But I'm kind of hoping that the fact that we've taped it up like a really well wrapped Christmas present, that we won't get much of that. So now it's time for mixing the resin for the main pour. So I'm using a blackish green mica powder for this particular mix. Quite like the colour of it, and I think it would go quite well with the stain that I decided to use, that you'll see a little bit later on. Gave it a few spoonfuls of the mica powder, mixed it for about 5 minutes, and it was around about 500 millilitres of resin I think I ended up using. I wanted to mix more than I needed. I tried to calculate it as best I possibly could, but it was tricky. And then once the pour was done, it was just using the mini blowtorch just to get rid of any surface air bubbles. And then it was time just to leave it to cure overnight. Wow, I've got to say, that was really quite nerve-wracking. I've done probably hundreds of resin pours over the past few years, and I don't think I've been that nervous doing this particular one. And the reason for that is because of this veneer. It's when I come to the sanding part, it's there's a risk of going through that veneer. So anyway, it's done. It's starting to cure as we speak. I'm going to leave the heater on in here just to help. So yeah, give it 24 hours and we'll see where we're at. Always the way. I've made too much resin. So I've made some coasters for the missus, so she'll be happy. Okay, so it's all cured, and it's cured quite nicely, actually. It's not flooded too much, not much overspill, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now it's just going to be time for sanding, so I'm going to remove the tape, and I'm going to start quite a high grit. So I'm going to start at 240. I wouldn't normally start that high, but because of my concern for the veneer, I'm going to start quite high and then go probably 400, maybe 800, and probably up to 1,000, just to get a nice finish on this. So let's do that now. Once the sanding's done, it's then going to be polishing, and then it'll be staining. So let's crack on. So I removed the makeshift barrier. I put on both the ends of the table, then removed the painter's tape. I was umming and ahhing about keeping the painter's tape on and maybe sanding over the top of it, as I might have alluded to earlier on, but I decided against it, and going with a higher grit, I thought I had, less of a risk of going through the veneer. So that was my rationale. But this makeshift barrier worked pretty well. I'm pretty pleased with the way that it helped stop the resin, so it wasn't too bad. There were a couple of spots where the resin had kind of leaked through, but it wasn't too bad. And I just used a carbide scraper, just very slowly but surely, just remove that before I cracked on with the sanding. So onto the sanding, and it was 240, 400, 600 and 1000 grit. I don't think I needed to go higher than 1000 for the final finish. 1000 grit leaves a pretty smooth finish, so that was going to be plenty high enough. I was just using the water spray just to wipe off the dust in between sands, and then I used water with the 600 and 1000 grit for a wet sand, but not too much water. I didn't want it to affect the veneer. On to staining, and I'm using Morel's Walnut Light Fast Stain here. Quite like the colour, and I'm using a pad to add the stain. It's a lint-free cloth with some cotton wool to make the pad. Nice smooth strokes. Same on the legs. I apply quite a few coats just to get a nice dark, rich colour. And then a top coat of feed and wax. I'm just brushing this on. Same on the legs. Then once it's had a good coat, it's time just to buff it up with a lint-free cloth. And there it was done. Really pleased with the outcome of this one. The colour of the resin and the colour of the stain really complement each other really nicely, I think. I was really pleased with the way that it looks. You'll get to see it in the final reel in a few moments. So let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed the process of this one. It did throw up a few challenges, discovering that it was chipboard underneath that veneer was a bit of a surprise. It was really well veneered. but I think I handled it pretty well, dealing with the fact that it was chipboard underneath and needing to think about how the resin pour needed to be done. So I didn't go through that veneer, but I think I handled it pretty well. So I'm happy. Before I sign off and let you take a look at the final results, I just want to give a massive shout out and a big thank you to Rob at the Weekend Shed Head. He mentioned me in a recent video of his, and to get a mention from someone like Rob was massive. I'm a small channel. I've only just started, so it really meant a lot to me. So thanks, Rob. Thanks, buddy. Really appreciate it. Anyway, that's me done. If I can just ask that you like and subscribe if you haven't already, and chuck in some comments. Let me know what you think. Really want to hear what you guys have got to say. So I'll stop rabbiting now and I'll let you take a look at the final results. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.